February 23rd, 1836. The first cannonball hits the walls of the Alamo. For the 170 Texan defenders, that is an ominous sound. They are outnumbered 10 to 1, and from their posts they can see the red flag that the Mexicans are flying. That flag means that the Mexicans won't be taking any prisoners. Those Texans are in a fight for their lives. Relations between the Mexican government and its province, Texas, had been strained for some time. Huge numbers of immigrants from the USA had been invited to settle in Texas. Those migrants had little loyalty to the Mexican government and so were quick to rebel. Then in 1835, Mexican President Santa Anna made himself dictator, leading the Texans to rise up in revolt. Santa Anna immediately raised an army to put down the rebellion and marched north to Texas. He would meet the Texans for the first time here at the Alamo in a siege that would last 13 days. The Alamo itself was a former religious building that had been turned into a fort. Defending it were 170 men, including several folk heroes of American history. One such legendary figure was Davy Crockett. He was renowned as the king of the Wild West due to his hunting and shooting skills. He had served as a congressman from Tennessee and was known for his controversial views. The commander of the defenders was Jim Bowie, another folk hero of the Wild West. Bowie is a former slave smuggler and is perhaps most famous for his use of the Bowie knife, which became an iconic weapon on the frontier. On February the 23rd, 1836, the Mexican army arrived at the Alamo and immediately began bombarding the walls. However, the cannons were placed too far away to do significant damage. The next day, Jim Bowie fell ill, and so command was passed to William Travis. Travis immediately acknowledged the dire situation that the Texans were in and penned an open letter in which he called for all those that were willing to join the fight for Texas independence. That would come to be known as the Victory or Death Letter and remains part of the history education for Texas school children to this day. The Mexican cannons continued to make little impact on the walls, and so the next day 200 Mexicans were sent to take some shacks that were closer to the Alamo. This was a grave threat to the Texans. Cannons placed there would do significantly more damage than they had been. The Texans immediately began firing upon the Mexicans, and a short battle broke out. After fierce fighting, the Texans were able to drive the Mexicans away from the shacks. That night they rode out to burn them to prevent them being used again. A few days later, Travis's call for reinforcements was answered when 32 men arrived to join the fight. Those men were initially believed to be Mexicans and were fired upon by the defenders until their accents eventually revealed them to be Texans. With the situation a stalemate, Santa Anna decided that the only option was to use his greater numbers to storm the walls, and so on the 5th of March, 12 days after the siege had started, the Mexican cannons fell silent. As Santa Anna anticipated, the exhausted Texans soon fell into the first uninterrupted sleep that they had had since the siege began. As the Texans slept, the Mexicans deployed for battle. Santa Anna divided his men into 4 columns that would attack the walls in different places. He sent 350 men to attack the northwest corner, 400 to attack the north wall, 400 to attack the east wall, and 125 to the south. At 6 a.m. the Texans were awoken to the shouts of Viva Santa Anna and the Mexican bugles. The Mexicans advanced on the walls but were immediately hit with problems. They were employing a column formation, which meant that only the men at the front could fire. That also presented an easy target for the Texan artillery. The ideal weapon for the Texan artillery would have been canister shot. Canister shot allows the cannon to shoot numerous small lead balls rather than one big cannonball. This effectively turns the cannon into a giant shotgun and would have made mincemeat of the Mexican men. To try to replicate this, the Texans filled their cannons with any metal they could find. Door hinges, nails, and chopped up horseshoes were all fired at the Mexicans. That did have some success. One Mexican commander later wrote that a single volley killed half a company of soldiers. Twice the Mexican soldiers tried to storm the walls, but both times they were repelled. Eventually, the 2 Mexican columns in the east and west were diverted north, until almost all of the Mexican soldiers were at the north wall. Despite taking heavy losses, the Mexicans continued their advance and made it to the base of the walls. The walls were not particularly high, less than 4 meters, and so the Mexicans were able to climb them with their bare hands. Eventually, the Texans were not able to fire fast enough to repel the attackers, and the Mexicans were able to take the north wall. Those Texans that survived retreated to the rooms inside the Alamo, where they would fire out of windows and holes. Gradually, the Mexicans went room by room, blasting the door with a cannon before charging in to fight in hand-to-hand combat. The last of the Texans to die were those manning the cannons at the chapel. Eventually, they too were overwhelmed. The Mexican troops refused to take any prisoners, and any Texans that surrendered were executed. However, the Mexicans did spare some of the non-combatants, such as women and children. For almost an hour, the Mexican soldiers continued to inspect the bodies of the Texans for any sign of life, stabbing any that moved. The Mexicans had won the battle and taken the Alamo. However, the brutality of the Mexicans made Texas even more determined to win its independence. The cry "Remember the Alamo" became a rallying cry for the Texan independence movement. Independence was won the next month when the Mexican forces were taken by surprise at the Battle of San Jacinto. Santa Anna himself was captured and forced to move his troops out of Texas. Texas had won its independence. The Lone Star State had been born.